This is Barrie, a city constantly evolving. At any time, a whole host of pressures challenge the intricate tapestry of city government. In this series, we will explore the priorities deemed essential for progress, even if they don't always inspire unanimous applause. Join me each week for a candid conversation with a member of our city government as we uncover the stories behind the scenes of Barrie, a city on the move. Welcome to Barrie City on the Move. I'm Arif Khan, and it's my pleasure to join you wherever you're receiving this content, on cable, streaming online on YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. In this series, we look to explore the dynamic, the relationship between City Hall and the people, their responsibility for delivering a quality of life to us as residents, and sometimes that includes the partnerships with third-party organizations that assist City Hall in delivering upon that vision and that strategic plan. And today is no different. I have the pleasure of speaking with Chief Rich Johnston, Chief of Barrie Police Service. Chief, thanks for joining. Appreciate having you on once again.
Happy to be here.
So we got through the intro. I'm excited about that, and this is not your first time here, so love to maybe do a little bit of a recap of maybe the last year, some of your priorities, what you've been accomplishing, but also maybe let's just start with sort of a state of the city, where we're at in terms of crime and quality of life, and how you're meeting your strategic priorities that you've laid out.
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity, and I will state this right off the bat. Barrie is a safe city. And we are a safe city, and a safe province, and a safe country. And now, I say that from a very, from a statistical sense versus a feeling sense. And I do recognize that people may feel unsafe at times, and I do recognize that. And so, I do want to be upfront about that. Now, when I talk about the city of Barrie, we are currently within the province one of the safer cities. We are not, as you can imagine, we do experience crime. We do experience social disorder, like any given population. And we are the biggest city in the county. And so we disproportionately have those experiences more so than the rest of the county because we have the most population. Population is one of the drivers. Now, within that, I mean, we're doing really innovative work in the areas of the Barrie Police Services Board's priorities to the organization, or in particular with respect to victims of crime, as well as high harm offenses. And we've targeted those areas with the intention of changing the experience of the victims when they do come in to contact with the justice system, the front end, the Barrie Police, the police service, as well as how we deal with high harm offenses and high harm locations. And those are areas or individuals that are disproportionately responsible for some of the more serious events and serious crimes in our community. And so we've applied resources to better track, to better be present, to reduce those instances of crime, as well as make those locations safer.
So with that in mind, and I think it's important to just disclose this real quick to those of you who are at home as well. Full disclosure, I do sit as a civilian member, as a provincial appointee on the Barrie Police Services Board that you mentioned, the strategic priority. So I just thought I would get that on record. I think it's fair. One of the things, some of the things I'd like to discuss today as we go through the next hour include sort of the evolution of policing. What does it look like? What does modern policing look like today? What has changed in terms of the challenges that you address and how they are addressed, so the strategies that may be employed. Maybe the culture as well, finding the right people for the right task. We'll cover some of that. We'll cover some of the budgetary constraints. We won't get into the budget, but the financial pressures
Sure.
that are required to address. So we'll cover some of those things. But you did talk about, obviously, safety statistically versus safety from a perspective. Absolutely, I think anybody tuning in will say, you know, we wouldn't be doing our job and we wouldn't be doing justice, so to speak, if we didn't cover some of the things that have been in the news lately. Obviously, encampments are in the news. The state of emergency within the city of Barrie is in the news. What prompted that I would argue some of the events within the encampment community prompted that. Mental health. We'll talk about some of the partnerships as well that you have with perhaps Canadian Mental Health and the hospital and how those are working.
Sure.
So let's cover some of that. But just by way of background, you're 28 years in service as a police officer. You started where most would start, but 28 years ago. In a nutshell, from your vantage point right now, what's changed? If you look back on your life, what you endured, what you did, what you tolerated, what you thought was appropriate and acceptable versus today, give us a bit of an idea on how that's changed.
I mean, there's so many facets to the question, and I appreciating the question. What hasn't changed is more an appropriate question. I started, as all police officers do, on the front line. And you go through working calls for service, or when people need or request or need the police to attend, and that took up the first chunk of my career in policing. I mean, we didn't have body-worn cameras. There were levels of oversight, but not the numerous levels of oversight now. Again, holding police accountable. I'm not in any way, shape, or form disagreeing with that. I think there's value there because I think there's an expectation on behalf of the community that you should have the best policing possible in Canada, and I think we do. But there's levels of oversight to that. Everything from equipment, but to your point, the culture, and I think probably that has progressed and changed, not at a pace that I would suggest kept up with technology or equipment or broader community expectations. But I think there's good cause for our community to trust in the police because you have a passionate group of individuals that want to keep their community safe. And I'm very fortunate to work at the Barrie Police Service because those individuals that wear a red stripe down the side of their leg and the members that support them are very passionate about what they do.
So, as you mentioned, a lot has changed. And one of the things that has really come to the fore is, there's the mechanics of policing, but then there's the human element of policing. And if you were to, we talked before starting this recording, some of the standards and qualifications required to become a police officer. And you sort of said that some of those standards, while appropriate, they address maybe a standard that isn't applied on a daily basis. And I think the biggest thing that really jumped out to me was sort of the human element, the mental health, the behavioral, the psychological, versus the physical demands of training.
What we ask of our police officers today in Barrie, in Ontario, and Canada, they deal with complex societal issues, the intersection of mental health, addictions, and complex needs of a society, and certainly, there are aspects of the job that remain. There may be the requirement for a physicality, but at the end of the day, so much more is solved when we're interacting with that community, when you're treating individuals with what is called the procedural justice, and you're treating every individual, as our officers do, with dignity, because every person is a person. And so how you interact with that person becomes incredibly paramount. So the emotional intelligence required to be a police officer, I think, has drastically changed. And I mean no disrespect to the past, where I came from. And that is one of the growth areas that I've seen in terms of policing, in terms of how we interact. The prioritization of focusing on that interaction and engaging in a manner that the person feels that they've been heard, and the officer is explaining what they're doing and why they're doing it.
So you've got approximately 160,000 people in the city of Barrie as of now. The city's continuing to grow. There's an expectation of growth. And all 160,000 members of the community, I think rightly, expect to have a standard of policing, a standard of safety, a standard of care, et cetera. A standard of also being held accountable if maybe we have a speeding ticket or something like that. However, the proportion of resources that are directed at the 160 versus at maybe a percentage of that 160, sort of give an idea of where the service's resources are most highly sought, they're most in demand, and maybe also, again, what's changed over the years in terms of that priority or the draw and the drain on resources.
So the challenge will always be we are a finite resource. And I'm sure your viewers can appreciate, we know we're not inexpensive. The reality is, though, that whereas in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s, there's a belief that if you could randomly patrol everywhere equally all the same, then people would think you're everywhere all the time. And the reality behind that is, unless you're standing at your window at 4 o'clock in the morning looking out and you see a police car drive by, how do you know that police car drove by? And, there's ways of tracking and such, but at the end of the day, in modern policing with a finite resource, you have to look at where to get the most bang for your buck, where can you be the most effective and efficient given your finite resource. And so we look at our data. Now, if we're just talking about crime, you can map crime when it's reported by our community, when they've been victimized. You can map that crime, and you can see that there's locations that are disproportionately what we call hot spots of where it happens more than the rest. Crime does not equally nor spatially occur. It is unevenly distributed across a population. So you look in certain pockets and you'll see hot spots of whether it be property crime or more violent crime. But that's different than what we call social disorder. And then you can appreciate in the current circumstances we are right now, we have a crisis right now, an unhoused crisis, where there are challenges with that with respect to now. It's not about a fear of crime, but is very much a sense from a number of the community of feeling uncomfortable, seeing individuals that are unhoused and that don't that are behaving in ways that we may not feel comfortable with. Are they a threat to that person? In all likelihood not, or else we would have been there. But it would make one feel uncomfortable, and we have to understand that, and how do we address that? That's different than the crime. Then we have the violent crime. On top of that, we have a normal, healthy society and a community that likes to see us. And so you have those finite resources, and you're trying to put them in places where there is that high visibility, there's high levels of engagement, because we want to be approachable. So it's not that we can be everything to everyone, but we're trying to be in the best places at the best time for the best result. And for the Barrie Police Service Board and our strategic plan, and for the Barrie Police Service, it is to reduce the number of victims. If we're in a location and the crime doesn't happen in the first place, that is true police performance, because the reduction of victimization is a true measure of police performance. Yes, we will, if someone commits a crime and the police catching that criminal, that is an important metric, not debating that. But the lack of the offense in the first place and the lack of the victim, that's the true purpose of police. We're here to help.
Well, with that in mind, I think you've opened up a few areas for further discussion, whether it's regarding, and we will touch on automated speed enforcement and the impending change there, but some of these other metrics that you've discussed. When we come back from the break, something I'd like to explore with you is the whole concept of proactive policing. And I think you sort of planted a seed there perfectly, which works really well for me. But there is perception, there is actual harm, there is actual crime, but there's that level of, as you said, discomfort. And I think the public, if they've been vocal at all, is not necessarily implying that there is a ton of crime going on, but that maybe the standard needs to be looked at in terms of what is acceptable social behavior and why I may or may not be voting with my dollars to go to a certain part of the city to spend time with my family there, for example. So I'd like to explore that a little bit further with you as well. But when we come back from the break, more from Barrie Police Chief Rich Johnston, and we'll get into what this whole concept is around proactive policing, and I think you'll be quite fascinated by it. So stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and I'm having a great conversation with Chief Rich Johnston, Barrie Police Service Chief. Glad you're here. You talked about a number of things, and we sort of did a bit of a setup in the first segment there, talking a little bit about what life was like when you first started, how things have evolved, how you've evolved, but now also addressing what is real and relevant today. And for as long as I've known you, you have been mindful of the fact that perception to many is their reality, and you can't exclude that from the conversation. But you also talked about the fact that you acknowledge that you're not an inexpensive resource, your unit, your whole department. So policing is expensive. And also being a finite resource. So I'm just sort of bringing that back to the fore because I wanted to get into this whole concept of proactive policing. And I don't know about trial and error necessarily being the world's greatest strategy when you're talking about policing, but you do learn from what has worked, what's no longer working, what's no longer serving, and how do we adjust. Proactive policing as it pertains to the finite resource, the budgetary pressures, and really the way the community has involved. How does that play into that strategy?
Well, it really goes back to, it doesn't go back to metrics, but the best way to explain it is through metrics as the vehicle to explain it. So when we talk about crime, the measurement of crime, and I think there's an expectation on the community, this is our police are a resource and we fund it. How are we measuring its effectiveness? And I think there's an expectation that we are doing that. And when I started in policing in Barrie, when I was first exposed to some of the board presentations, what we did was focus on what most police services do, purely on volume, crime volume. How many crimes took place? How many crimes of a particular type, but overall the city, how much crime took place. And with respect to that, I think you look at that is important. It's not to be discounted, but if you're really thinking about crime, it's far more complex the way it should be measured and needs to be measured. And so what I mean by that is simple volume just gives you a gauge, but what is that crime made up of? So when we look at our crime picture in Barrie, we will have a number of theft offenses, shoplifting and such. That is a very numerous type offense. The more grievous and disturbing offenses, sexual assault, violent sexual assaults, homicide, murder, rare compared to the theft. Let me be crystal clear. I'm not saying the theft doesn't matter, but when held against a single theft, against a single sexual assault, you're not hard pressed. The reality is the harm that comes to the victim, to the broader community from that having occurred in your community is far greater than a theft. And so you measure offenses by the weight of them or how harmful they are. Now,
are you leaning towards referring to the crime severity index in that perspective?
And that's where we get the measurement from. And again, and there's a whole backstory to that in terms of, how did we come to say what's serious and what's not? We didn't. Right. The judiciary put in place by a duly elected government set those individuals in place, and the crime severity index is actually a direct result of actual penalties handed down, incarceration rates for particular offenses. So that weight, or what's most serious, is determined by the public. It is actually a democratic ideal that, what's the most serious? By the election of a duly appointed, your parliamentarians. They appoint judges. That direction comes from judges, not the police. So we don't touch the weights. The weights come from the society. They tell us what's most serious. Now, when we look at that, though, and we have what we call community harm-based offenses, those are the ones where a victim there's a victim, it occurs, we react to it. That is a great deal of what we deal with. There's also commercial type crime where, as you can imagine, commercial entities, businesses, shoplifting, that they are the volume type crimes, they occur. But if I'm a big box store and I hire a whole bunch of more loss security or loss prevention agents, we're going to detect a lot more shoplifting because I've poured more resources into it. As you can appreciate, it's not that more shoplifting is occurring, more is being detected. So when we talk about proactive policing, it's called proactive detected policing or proactive detected crime. So when you see officers and they have the availability to go out there and more proactively police in the community, they're going out and they're going to those areas where we, looking at our data, have seen a greater propensity for crime. And they're going into those areas and the intention there is to more actively engage with the community. So when you look at the measurement of crime, there's a notable difference between if someone commits a robbery with a firearm or if a police officer on their own volition, stops a vehicle, and during that vehicle stop lawfully detects a firearm within that. Those are two different types of offenses. One is proactively detected by the police. The other one is a reactive, community-based harm where someone used a firearm in a robbery. And so when you look at stats, they just measure all crime, volume. So the better your police are at detecting crime before the victim, there is a victimization. So that firearm illegally in a car, that ride program that captures or stops that impaired driver before they're able to hurt someone, those are proactive police type investigations. What you want to see in a healthy community is proactive policing go up and community-based harm go down. And so, you can have the same amount of crime by numbers, volume only, but you're proactively stopping victimization before it happens, whereas the community-based harm, you may have no proactive policing, have a lower level of community-based harm, but there's more victims. That's an ineffective police service. So it gets complex.
It does, but actually I think this is a great opportunity for you to give a bit of a sneak peek on sort of the makeup of the Barrie Police Service. Many of us would be well within our rights and reasonable to say, when I see the beautiful police vehicles driving around the city, you get to take the nod for that one too, I think. That's my understanding of policing, is these vehicles or these officers maybe in their high visibility outfits and uniforms. That's my understanding of what policing is looking like in my city. But behind the scenes, you're talking about proactive, you're talking about data, you're talking about numbers, et cetera. There's a whole cohort of civilian as well as sworn officers who are working different angles, doing different things to assist the officer on the road with some of this crime detection. Give us a sneak peek.
Absolutely, and not just those officers on the road. And I'll be very, and I'll harken back to your previous point with what I've seen change. The reliance on analysis and crime, in-depth crime analysis is so vital in today's world. So when we look at the Barrie Police Service, yes, you see those highly visible cars because they're meant to be. They're meant for you to see them and to say the police are here, I see them. Again, as to most of us, it's like if I'm traveling at a higher rate of speed, perhaps that's a reminder to just do the right thing and travel the correct speed. But if I'm an individual about to commit crime, the idea being there is a capable guardian. They're very visible. They're not hiding. They're out there to be seen. Perhaps I don't want to commit this crime right now because there's a police officer right there. That's that visibility aspect. There are also other units within our organization, and I hope, and I'm sure your viewers can appreciate, you see the visible portion of policing, but there's so much going on. The analysts are working with those, the very visible frontline workers. We also have our community service. We also have an example of a more proactive unit. It's called the high harm unit. As you can appreciate in today's society, we have challenges with our just volume in the justice system because because of our society and the nature of how it works. We have officers dedicated to those who commit the most grievous offenses in our community are identified, and we have a unit that ensures that as best as possible that they are regularly visiting those individuals and ensuring that they are behaving in a manner that is expected within our society. They're not committing more offenses.
Are they similar to like the repeat offender unit?
We're also part of that as well on a provincial level, but yes, you can think of that as a local level type approach, because at the end of the day, what we know from our crime statistics is that a disproportionate amount of our crime is committed by those individuals, that smaller group of individuals that have a propensity for recidivism. And so that is our intention with our high harm policing. Now, you won't always see them, but they're there. And so that is their role. They're passionate about what they do, and what they want to do is protect the people in this community, alongside the uniformed officers, alongside our street crime and drug unit, alongside our canine unit, our tactical unit, our community services unit. We have so many units, but the idea being it's not one style of policing for a complex community. It takes many, many, many units to do so.
Mm-hmm. Now, I have brought this up in conversation with you in the past. You know, I witnessed something, I know it's wrong. Why aren't the cops coming? Or if I call it in and say it, why aren't they running to it? Talk about the importance and what goes into building not just, yes, there's that instant, but also ensuring the integrity of an investigation and the bigger picture of a case?
So, I mean, on a broad level, you see something, you call it in. We are appreciative as a society, as a policing organization. We need a society that has trust in the police that they will continue to call in. A functioning society, a functioning police service needs a society willing to trust the police that they are able to call in and that we will react. A finite resource cannot be there immediately, and appreciating people that have that expectation. I understand that, and we do our best. We do our best to meet those expectations. The women and men in uniform, they're passionate and they try their best to be there, but there's also competing priorities. And depending on the nature of the offense, if someone steals something and it's not that it's insignificant, but there's a more serious offense going on, they have to be redirected there. So I think that's important just to state from the outset. But just in terms of the finite resource and the nature of that, we have to accept that we have to prioritize, given the size of our community and the growth of our community, and because the population is of such a size that our finite resource is only able to redirect resources to the most serious offenses at all times.
So we're going to come up with budget at some point because you keep hitting the finite resources element. I imagine if there were more police officers, that might adjust slightly. We're not going to talk about this year's budget because we're still in the middle of that discussion, but there are these monetary pressures. You talked earlier, though, about a provincial program that the Barrie Police Service is a part of, and when I mentioned sort of the repeat offenders program, et cetera. It used to be that local police agencies didn't have the benefit of being able to speak to each other and communicate and share data. Has that evolved through these similar types of collaborations?
Any type of joint force operation is valuable insofar as it connects the different organizations. Are police agencies able to seamlessly talk with each other? Never as smoothly as I'd like it, never as fast as I'd like it, but I appreciate that is changing and evolving, and it's getting better. I think there's opportunities there with new technologies to explore different ways to enhance that communication between organizations, but even within the police, within the Barrie Police Service, there's technologies that are evolving that are going to be better able to address the complex challenges within our community more effectively. And it's not simply, and I appreciate some of your viewers, like the chief just wants more police officers. No. We need an appropriate amount to address the challenges, but we've looked at so many different ways to deliver services differently, but also into the future in terms of what does service look like in the future. It can change drastically.
So we do have to go to break, but you touched on a couple things, like you're almost reading my mind. No, we don't have a script. And that is, though, the use of technology. So I'd like to look at that. I'd like to look at the recruiting process. Who is the right person for the role today, and what does that role look like? Is there the ideal police officer, or are there many? Don't answer. We'll get into that in a minute. But the other thing that actually I think is fair is certainly with the drug trade and the drug distribution, et cetera, it's not always homegrown and all within our local bubble. We've got members who are bringing in from the GTA, for example, their product for distribution, and that's where I was really going to with that sharing of information. So let's talk about that when we come back for the break. We do have to go to break. Stay with us. More from Rich Johnston, Chief of Police of Barrie Police Service, right after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and having a great conversation with Chief Rich Johnston of Barrie Police Service. Leading up to this, we've talked about really the evolution of the service, evolution of policing, evolution of crime and safety and community safety. For the most part, we'll get into some more details, some of the pressures, and some of the reprioritization based on the metrics and the data that you follow. Tell me, if all you had was the level of staffing and sworn complement that you had when you started 28 years ago, and none of the technology, when I talk about technology, I mean really more computer and data and information sharing and gathering, not so much your body armor, for example. Yeah. What would it look like today, or where would you be? I mean, how efficient would you be?
I mean, as you can appreciate, where would we be? and I don't mean this in any in a negative fashion, we'd be driving around aimlessly and just best guessing or what we think, and those would be based on individual experiences, anecdotal individual experiences of individual officers. And it's not a knock, because at the end of the day, that's that very foundation of policing is based on the officers going out into the community, and again, they individually interact given a circumstance. But that's one experience. What data allows you to do is compile thousands of anecdotal experiences of hundreds of officers over years, and you can broaden that with larger areas, and then you can see trends in the data. You do not see that as an individual. Technology is vital in terms of current policing, married with the experience of police officers. It's not one or the other. It's actually them working in concert to produce the best and the most effective, efficient initiatives and approaches to addressing crime and social disorder.
And do you study locally as well as regional, as well as sort of a broader?
You have to. In today's world, if you're not looking at the trends in the data and applied criminology in terms of the research around what works, you're probably in the wrong business.
So if we were recruiting 30 years ago compared to recruiting today, what are the demands on a recruit, or what is a service looking for in a recruit that might be different?
Well, I'll go back to what the expectations of a police officer. And it's, I think, and I'll stay with current, because I think the challenges faced by the current police officers are so complex. I mean, we don't expect them to be social workers, teachers, parents when they go to calls, but quite often they're adopting skill sets that are required in those different professions and callings. And it is when we look at our what we're looking for in a current police officer, it is an ability to engage with a community member as best as possible, be transparent in your motives, but treat that individual who's probably having the worst day of their life in a manner, whether they've committed the act or are the victim of that act, in a manner that, while recognizing their dignity, is still in obeyance with the law and what is required for that officer to do. It is a thankless job at the best of times, and what we ask, what the current police officer looks like, is a reflection of a broader community, but more importantly, it is an emotionally intelligent individual who is a complex thinker, critical thinker, is curious about what works and what doesn't, is willing to, if something doesn't work, can pivot quickly and try something else. Whereas I would argue the historical police officer, back in the day, it's my way or the highway, and we have to. You look, and that's changed drastically.
I'm just going to pick on you for a second.
For sure.
You have changed. Even in the decade plus that I've known you, you have changed. And part of that has been you pursued higher education, you're consummate reader and learner, et cetera. I don't think it's unreasonable for the public to still be anchored a little bit to what they thought a police officer was, pretty much a stick of wood, right? Like just no personality whatsoever. Are you seeing a difference?
I think the police officer that we all, in our mind's eye, look at, they were walk the street, and they had the ability to walk the foot patrol in there. I mean, the UK was a police officer, a copper on every corner. I mean, appreciating at that time has long passed, and only because our corners are so much bigger, it's wider, and there's so much more people concentrated in areas. I think when our community engages with our police officers, there is an expectation that there is a professionalism to that police officer, but there's also a humanity. I think there's an expectation that the person's going to have an opportunity to explain what happened, and an understanding that the officer's going to listen. Mm-hmm. Whereas perhaps in the past, it was like, doesn't matter, the police are here and you're just going to do what they say. I think that's changed drastically, the expectations on a police officer.
So whether it's sociologists, behavioral experts, the data, the combination of it, other experts from other regions, the Barrie Police Service has thought about and flirted with or explored the idea of trying new programs. And oftentimes they go out as you roll out a pilot program or a beta program before implementing it. Talk about some of them that you've deployed over the last 2 years, for example, in the community. I would say specifically around mental health has been one, and addiction services, et cetera. These are all skill sets that your officers might not have been formally trained in, going up through the academy, et cetera. So talk about the importance and how well these tests have delivered results. So,
and that's an excellent point. When you go through basic training as a police officer, you do get exposed to mental health, at a very rudimentary level, that initial when you're interacting with someone in crisis. And that's across the province, and there is a level of understanding by police officers. But as you go through your career, you're repeatedly exposed to that. When we have a program, one of those programs that we've piloted, and I think you're seeing it across the province in a number of areas now, is that MCERT type program where you're having the mental, it's a mental health worker partnered with a police officer in a crisis response team.
So MCRT,
yes.
Mental Health Crisis Response Team. Okay.
Yes. Sorry, and we are in the world of acronyms now in policing. But the reality is, the idea is when we're going to someone in crisis, which is regular and quite common, what is the most appropriate response? And quite often it is not a police officer showing up in uniform with a limited skill set with respect to people in crisis. There is a skill set there. We've up-trained. We've done the best we can. But we are 24/7. Rain or shine, we pick up the phone. So we're looking at programs where we're drawing in subject matter experts in those particular crisis fields to better address those situations. The MCERT is fairly well known across the province now, and we've seen different types of models. We're also piloting another program where we have to push the envelope as a community, and I will unapologetically lean on research for this. And the expectation in today's world for policing not to at least acknowledge or be aware of the sociological, the psychological, the criminological research that's out there of things that may work, shame on the policing then. Because you look at it and it's, right now we have we're piloting a program with the Canadian Mental Health Association and our paramedic friends, paramedic services of Simcoe County. But we're also involved in terms of when someone needs help, they know 3 numbers. And everyone dials 911. So that's our role. But if someone's in crisis and they are not actively violent, and that can be a spectrum, and I can appreciate that, but if they're not waving a gun or a knife and there's not that active level of violence, but they are in crisis, as an industry, are we the best to respond? Our suggestion is, when you look at the research, and there's a number of places in the States that have tried it based on the CAHOOTS model out of Seattle was the original program. It's an emergency response, a non-police emergency response. So the crisis worker partnered with a paramedic, so mental health partnered with physical health, attend that call. We can send them because we're the police and it's 911 they dialed, but we're not showing up unless our community partners need us. And so when we don't show up, does the temperature get turned down simply because our mere presence can cause an effect? And what we're finding is we're not getting the calls for we need the police to attend at all. What we're finding is our community social, Simcoe County mental health workers and our paramedic friends are addressing the needs, put them in contact with resources, and then we're not seeing them again. The police aren't dealing with them. But that's a person in crisis. There's no crime there, in all likelihood, and depending upon the circumstances. If there is, we change who's going to that call. But we have to test and see how effective that is. Because I think there's an expectation on our community, we are a finite resource, maybe we don't have to go to everything. Whereas historically, 911, we always pick up.
Mm-hmm. And I think, and I'm going to just touch on this just ever so briefly, but as we all will recall, certainly not so long ago, there was a whole defund movement. And this is the chief of police saying, oh, you're absolutely right, we don't need to show up at everything. And I think that's important to recognize is that we show up to everything, because some of these other agencies do close their doors at 5 or 6 p.m. and aren't able to provide service after hours, you're still dialing 911 if you're in crisis or if someone's in crisis. That being said, you talked about in London and certainly in the UK, a cop on every corner, a Bobby on the beat, or whatever they referred to them as, certainly a friendly face on the street corner. At the same time, quite recently, police were asked to get out of the school system, to get out of the school program, because there was an implication that police equals violence or police equals negativity, that kind of thing. Your service has evolved, has changed. You were asked to leave, and I believe you're being asked to come back in, or there was some discussion around that. But talk about also the uniform and the perception of policing in the community.
And we have to be alive to that as a police service in modern times. The experience of this police uniform for a great percentage of the population is quite positive. We represent, people see us and they feel safer, they feel protected, they feel the law is present and no harm can come, or if there's harm that they will be protected from that. But that experience is not universal. There are populations within our community, within the school system as well, that when they see us, we have the exact opposite effect. We have the exact opposite effect. People feel they're more under surveillance. People feel that there's an experience of anxiety with our presence. We acknowledge that, and then that's their reality. You don't get to pick and choose someone else's reality. That's their lived experience. And so we acknowledge that. Our intention is to be representative of the broader community in terms of being there when we're needed, when we're wanted, to help. It is a challenge to meet everyone's expectations.
So with that in mind, though, there is a school of thought that says, well, listen, if you weren't doing anything wrong, you shouldn't be, your temperature shouldn't rise when you're around a police officer. So whose responsibility is it? Is it the person who's having that reaction, or is it the officer who's in uniform based on what society has accepted as normal and appreciated?
And I think that's a fair criticism or pushback on a broader level. Within the school system itself, I think that may face a little more pushback in that those are institutions that are supposed to, be the last place that someone should feel uncomfortable. We all grew up in schools and we all had challenges in schools, but I mean, that is one of those where if you could control things to alter that and someone feels that uncomfortable and it is alterable, that's where the expectation, maybe the police don't show up.
So I'll ask you to hang on to that thought, and when we come back from the break, we'll pick up on that, because I really want to ask you about your vision for and the future of policing locally, but also on a broader scale, and that might include the way that we're entering school in uniforms as well. So stay with us for more from Chief Rich Johnston right after this break. Welcome back to Barrie City on the Move, and in our final segment with Chief Rich Johnston of Barrie Police Service, I want to get into what the future of policing looks like. And we started talking about technology, and we started talking about uniforms, etc. Let's get into that. By the way, for anybody who's kind of keeping score, you were pretty adamant, and I think you stand by it, about the impact, the effectiveness, and really the results that something like changing the paint job or the decaling on a vehicle would have. Nothing you do, as I've come to learn, nothing that you do is without a strategy behind it or without some evidence, as you said, behind it. So as people are sort of listening and reviewing this episode, this show, and maybe having a further conversation, I wonder how they will start to see that some of these dots are being connected into the overall strategy. So we talked about a vehicle. It's more visible. Maybe you'll change your behavior. We talked about technology. I want to get into more of that. We just started touching on the fact that the uniform and the way police are perceived in different environments. It's your responsibility as a professional to be mindful of that. We talked about the school system, and you mentioned that really nobody should ever feel uncomfortable in their school. So I want to make sure that the audience hears that we've sort of doubled down on that, but talk about how you've adjusted through simple things like just uniform.
Well, I think it is incredibly important. It is part of an officer's self-legitimacy, that uniform and the signal it sends. we've seen that alter over time. The level of equipment has altered as well, and I mean, I can appreciate the observation that it appears there's a greater militarization of policing, just in terms of the look. And I acknowledge that in terms of the equipment that they are required to carry by legislation, and the protective nature of some of the equipment. But where we can alter it, we have. I think you've seen some of the Barrie police officers in our community, at community events in particular, but just on general patrol, they might be wearing the brighter colored uniform shirt. That is not because we rolled the dice and said that's a really nice color. There's actual research to suggest that type of color it draws attention, and it draws, if someone's in need of assistance, what are we doing and why are we here? We are the police. We have the equipment to protect, but our role is to protect and serve our community. And so we want them to know we're there to serve and protect them. And so the idea behind that is, in a, if there's a gathering and there's a large group of individuals, when we show up, people should know we're there. We are not hiding. We are not hiding. We want to be in plain sight so everyone knows who we are and what we stand for. We're the police. And so you saw that alteration where we can. Now, the armor's the armor, and that is what it is, but you'll see various services trying to adopt that more approachable look, because we want to be approachable. We are not, policing is a civil authority. It is not the military. We are a civil authority, and we're here to help. And so our idea is to stand out so you see us. When you see our very visible cars, we want you to see us. We're here to help.
So in a few minutes that we really just have a few. Let's talk about technology. And by the way, I think it should be known, you do test everything yourself. Like you won't put anybody in a scenario if you haven't tested it out yourself. I know you walked in with this 50 pounds worth of body armor on, and anyway, but let's get into some of the technology. Certainly computers. There is a portal, by the way, that people can go at barriepolice.ca if they want to check out crime stats and what else. Do you want to point them somewhere real quick?
No, on our website, please, the community crime portal, you can look at crime and occurrences in your neighborhood. Not down a specific address, freedom of information, appreciating that. We maintain that always, but at that broader level, you can see within the city, but within your neighborhood area, please go there, explore. We want to be as transparent as possible.
Excellent. We are down to the wire, but we have a few minutes to do this. Technology is going to continue to play a role, and there's in the news today whether automated speed enforcement is a good idea or not. The Premier's decided he wants it gone. I believe the chiefs of police took a position that they are effective in changing behavior. Thoughts?
Again, I would, with the Ontario Association of Chiefs of Police, that was the stance taken, and again, I'll default to the research on that.
Okay, and red light cameras are on the horizon?
Big fan.
Big fan.
Big fan.
What's the difference? Why one and not the other?
Oh, it's not one or the other, but I like the red light cameras because we have a disproportional number of serious motor vehicle collisions and pedestrian strikes at certain intersections. Put up a red light camera. If everyone knows that it's there, we put big signs out. The true measure of effectiveness is the lack of collisions and the lack of pedestrians getting struck. It's not the number of tickets written.
Mm-hmm. And I have a funny feeling that the jury's still out regarding the automated speed enforcement, in the sense that it wasn't so much the problem with the camera itself, it was the lack of awareness of the camera that would allow me to proactively change my behavior before I got the ticket.
Fair.
So we'll see if that's going to change before December 31st. More technology, though. We've got cybercrime, but we also we see it on TV, facial recognition. Believe it or not, that is a topic of conversation right now in Ontario and in Canada about the potential use of cameras for facial recognition to assist with investigation.
Absolutely unapologetically supportive of it when it's done appropriately.
So tell me about that, because there are a lot of people who are going to say, that's an invasion of my privacy or whatever. Again, back to the whole concept of if you've done nothing wrong, you got nothing to hide. There's going to be that camp, but
I do want to point out. So, and we always go to the that potential negative. What are the positive aspects of this technology? And so I would point to the parent who's lost their child, to the family who've lost their elderly wandering individual. How can we better able to find them or locate them quicker? Then again, facial recognition. Again, if the photo or the image, and it's called one-to-many, and it's literally taking a lawfully obtained photo and the expectation of a lawful guardian, please find my child, they're missing, and we leverage cameras that exist to more quickly identify where that child is, I think that's an expectation on the community. Now, having said that, that will not be done without community engagement, without discussions, inviting critique and criticism, and safeguards in place to meet the expectations of a community. Like, you don't get free rein. This is not 1984 George Orwell. We are not a police state, but everywhere we are is, you're captured on camera somewhere.
I think that, that's the point that I was going to make, actually. We're already on camera. Our cars are already tracking us, our phones are already tracking us. I mean, unless you're still on an analog phone, or you've turned off your Bluetooth and your Wi-Fi, et cetera, we are already sharing this data. The tourism Barrie was able to tell us how many hundreds of thousands of people came into the region based on cell phone pings and tower pings, et cetera. So we're already on camera. I think that one of the things, though, is people think of the extremes.
Yes.
That you will abuse the power, that it's assumed that you will abuse the power. What type of oversights can we have in place? And I will ask you about civilian oversight.
So there are so many levels to police with civilian oversight, but in addition to that, I think beyond internal, and I think it's important, internal analysis of the use of the system and to be transparent in its use. You would also welcome an external body to look at it, because I think at the end of the day, if you're looking for that transparency and legitimacy, that's an expectation of the community. And to your point, we have nothing to hide. If we're using it appropriately and we're acknowledging that we're using it and we want the community to know that we're using it, I think it's a healthy thing. And Pandora's box is open. Let's just be upfront and use it appropriately after we've had that engagement with our community and they're safely comfortable with us using it.
No slight against any of your members, absolutely. But if you had 50 more officers, or if you had technology, where would you be more effective?
Oh, tough question. A bit of both. Look, I've seen programs where, and again, after a quick demos and stuff, you can have a drone over top of a location in 60 seconds if they're located across the city in the perfect locations, to at least provide a situational awareness. So instead of those extra officers, you could have that technology supporting some extra officers. We're a growing population with growing needs, so it's a bit of both. It's an unfair question.
Okay. Oh, really? Okay. All right. But I think, in fairness, I think if you were that victim, as you described, and you had the ability to deploy that technology and you didn't use it, I mean, is there, 1 minute or less, is there an example that comes to mind where technology could have had a better outcome? Well,
the easy example, we did have a call of a suicidal individual off one of the overpasses of the highway. We could have had a drone on site, or our pass is what it's called, on site within 60 seconds. The individual was just walking over. We had resources dedicated heading that way, where they could have been doing something else. And I know that sounds simple, but it's not. Like, think about when we really needed in multiple locations all at the same time when people call us. It just allows us to be more effective.
All right, well, with that in mind, we got to wrap it up. Any final thoughts? If you could change either policing or behavior of the community or anything like that, just, you got 30 seconds.
I want our community to know that we are trying our best. There's no one in policing that is just showing up. They're passionate, all of our members. They're passionate about making their community safer. I work with these individuals. I've worked with them for decades, some of them, but the younger ones coming in, they have a passion to serve and put service above themselves. That is a calling, and I'd want the community to understand that. We are trying. We'll never get it perfect, but it's in the attempt, I think, is more important, and I am very thankful for the people I work with.
I think it's important to let our audience know as well how much time goes into continuing education, exploring data from neighboring communities and other jurisdictions, even transatlantic, for example, just what's working and what's not. And this is a teaching organization or a learning organization, and I believe Barrie Police Service has been acknowledged as such across North America and the world. So with that in mind, I look forward to having you back to learn more about how some of these projects and programs that you're studying may get implemented and what those early signs show as results and where we continue to grow. So thank you very much, Chief Johnston, for joining me on the show, and thank you for tuning in and watching, and check out the Barrie Police website as well. We'll see you next time.